Hey guys, Cody here. I'm on day 72 of the Odin project and I spent 7 hours on the Odin project today. Let's look at the time breakdown on the screen. Yesterday I spent pretty much all my time coding. I had some typing at the beginning of the day that I got in, but I was spending it all on the shopping cart project. Today I finished up the shopping cart project, so still a lot of coding going on in the morning, but then also had some deploying and documentation for that project to actually get that in my portfolio and on GitHub. In addition to that, I worked through a couple course modules today, specifically with React Advanced Concepts and then also Backend as a Service. But we'll get into the details of those a little bit later on. But first, let's dive into what I did for the shopping cart project today. So this is my portfolio website. This is my website. I have it actually deployed on this website and on this same server. So I have a link to the live version here, and if we look, it looks very similar to what I had yesterday, except I did update the UI a little bit to make it look better. Specifically, added some better looking images for the website itself. In addition to that, if we look at the display product cart, add a couple items to the cart here, we will see that this looks a lot better than what it did yesterday. Specifically, we have the structure having the products kind of a bit more spaced out and having a heading for the shopping cart to let the user know this is the shopping cart, definitely. And just some better layout for the name, price, and quantity of each product. Additionally, I created a button for removing from the product cart as well. And lastly, a dynamic subtotal to see how many items are in the cart and also the total for all items in the cart. The last thing that I did beyond the display cart was actually getting these two links to work to the About and Testimonials portion of the website. So that's on the front page, and they are sections on the front page. Before, these did not work in that they would go to the front page, but then they would also set the state back to 0 because they were A references and they weren't links within React. So now I have them as links. So when we go here, we actually get it to the About section of the front page. And as we see up here, there's still 3 items in the cart. And if we go back to the shop, still 3 items in the shopping cart. And then if we click testimonials, it'll go down to this testimonial section and still 3 items in the cart. So that's looking good. I was happy with this. There's definitely a heck of a lot more I can do. Amazon.com was not built in a day or within a couple days for this project, but I decided it was time for me to move on to the next part of the curriculum. And the next part of the curriculum was actually advanced concepts within React. So these were actually related to some of the things that I encountered during the shopping cart project. So one specific thing was the passing of properties to multiple components, so passing it down a component tree. And this section was talking about ways of dealing with some of those common problems or those common patterns that come up when you're making larger scale applications. So let's go into some of those things. The first one is actually something that is more common to programming languages outside of JavaScript, and it's specifically defining the type of the properties, or for a data or a variable, defining the type of that data. And that is typically done to prevent errors down the line because it forces you to explicitly state what the data variable is going to be and what the type of that variable is going to be. And that becomes pretty important when you're doing things like conditional logic and when you're doing strict conditional logic with, like, say 3 equal signs. Then they need to be not only the same kind of characters, but also the same type of data as well. So that's something that can be utilized. Prop types is something that is specific to React, but then there's TypeScript, which is something that is very common. I see a lot with a lot of the developers that I follow. My brother actually uses TypeScript from some of the things that I've talked to him about in the past, and that's just another way of dealing with this declaration of types for data and variables. Another thing is styling components or using styled components. And that allows you to set default styling of HTML elements for like across the components instead of having to rewrite the styling for each component that has a similar styling or maybe like a similar button that is utilized. It creates a default styling for those specific elements. In addition to that, Redux was something that came up in this curriculum, and specifically Redux is a state management system that is utilized alongside something like React to have a centralized location for state. So if we remember back to the shopping cart project, I had to pass the shopping cart state into the nav so I could get it into the product cart, which was that little icon in the above. And then I would use that for actually getting the data for the item quantity. I would also pass some things down to the shop and down to the product card as well. And instead of having those things being then manipulated at those lower level components, there can be a central location, a central store essentially for the state that can be accessed by all the components, and that's what Redux is supposed to. Similar kind of problem that Context API helps with is when you have props that are shared by many components, or there's a lot of mid-level components that have the same properties being sent to them. Those things are called prop drilling, and it's a common pattern that comes up. For the Context API, it actually allows you to get around that by having parents provide data to all the components that fall within its component tree. So all its descendants within the component tree. So then you don't have to pass props each level and level and level. So you don't have to, for like the shopping cart app, I had the state set in the route switch. Instead of having to pass properties to each one down to the product card level, so the shop then to the product card, I could just have those properties within the route switch, and then it would pass down into the additional component levels within the component tree. Another thing was higher order components. Didn't necessarily go in depth with this, but it was just that it consumes a component and returns a third component. And then lastly, that there's more hooks out there that are constantly being developed and that you as a developer can actually contribute to. So this section was really just to give you an overview of these potentially advanced concepts that you might be using down the line with larger scale applications, and allowing you to come back to this kind of central location to then get more information about those things. So it was a pretty quick read for today. The next thing that I delved into with the curriculum was backend as a service, and this was specifically to get acquainted with something called Firebase. Firebase is a backend as a service provided by Google, and what that means is that the infrastructure of the databases and the backend code to access the databases is essentially handled by this API that you can connect to your front end, to your application, and have the data sent to Firebase and also retrieved from Firebase. So there's a lot of APIs and elements that you don't necessarily have to create the back-end logic and programming to actually have your product be functional. The main reason for the Odin project introducing this is that up until now, pretty much everything has been about the front end. Back end is 2 courses away within the JavaScript pathway. So after this JavaScript module, it'll be, I think, advanced HTML and CSS, and then I think it then goes into the back end. For now, though, there's going to be a couple more projects to finish out this JavaScript course, and in order to get to different levels of complexity for those projects, there needs to be some sort of back end. So this was just a stepping stone, just to get kind of familiar and start thinking about the back end a little bit, but utilize something that is already kind of pre-built and structured for you to focus on, making these more complex front end projects. So I was originally actually going to skip over this and just delve into the next project, but then I decided to step back a little bit since I do have some back-end experience and I do want to learn the back-end more, so I want to like get to the back-end course, but I decided that I have a limited knowledge of the back-end, even though I have some experience with back-end with some apps that I've made, that I wanted to actually get this experience to see what a back-end API would actually look like and to get an understanding of the value that that can have for creating applications. So I decided to actually go through this, and I will be using it within the Where's Waldo app that is coming up in the next part of the curriculum. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in following mine and Emily's journey, then definitely hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys tomorrow.